So recently I had a pretty weird idea for something that I wanted to try making. The concept is basically making a hot dog out of an onion ring. Let me clarify. I love an onion ring. The crispy, delicious batter, a little dipping sauce to go with it, and of course the onion. But the onion to batter ratio has always seemed a little off to me, and I'm definitely getting a much bigger mouthful of batter than onion. And I know that that's actually a big selling point to a lot of people, and is probably why even people who don't like onion can enjoy an onion ring. But me, I love onions, and I feel like I can hardly taste the onion in a standard onion ring. So my idea was to somehow essentially make a sausage or a hot dog without any meat whatsoever, but instead almost entirely onion. That's right, onion ground up, somehow stuffed into a sausage casing, then battered, and of course deep fried. So in this video, we're going through basically my whole process of working through this and making these onion dogs, and finally tasting it to see how this pretty bizarre concoction of mine actually came out. Going into this, I had no idea if this was even going to sort of work. There's a lot of science in sausage making and why it works particularly with meat, and I'm not using any of that. So I didn't really know what to expect or if this whole thing was going to be a disaster. I figured either way, I'd make the video, and if it was a huge disaster, well, maybe that would be just as entertaining as if it had worked out. So let's dive right in, and the first thing we have to do is start cutting up a whole bunch of onions. And naturally, the first thing I have to do is peel and break down a whole bunch of onions. For this, I'm using some large, sweet yellow onions because, well, they're the same type of onion I'd use if I was making onion rings. As I peel them, I'll quarter them up into some medium-sized chunks that will fit into my food processor. Nothing too specific here, just make these large onions a bit smaller. The food processor seemed like the obvious choice to smallify a ton of onions. And first I tried using the grater attachment. That ended up turning the onion into pretty much pulp, and that is not what I want. So I switched to the thin slicer attachment, and that is looking much better to me. After going through all the onion chunks, I ended up with a pretty humongous batch of onion slices. In hindsight, much more than I could have possibly needed for this experiment. But oh well, it takes onions to make onions, or something like that. Now, because onions have such a high water content, I pretty much have to cook these down at least somewhat to get some of that water out of them. I actually did do a small trial batch where I did not cook the onions at all, and when I tried running it through my sausage maker, all it did was squeeze a ton of water out of it and basically fill sausage casings with almost pure water, leaving behind just some dried out oniony mush at the bottom of the sausage canister. So I realized I pretty much had to cook these down quite a bit for this idea to even remotely work like I hope it will. After mixing in some olive oil and a generous pinch of kosher salt, I'll start sweating down these onions in my large enamel Dutch oven. And I ended up doing this step in 3 batches simply because I had way too many onions to fit into that Dutch oven all at once. And I'll mention that I'm not trying to entirely caramelize these onions, just cook out a bunch of the water and soften them up some. Anyway, after cooking them down until they're quite soft and have released a ton of moisture, I'll transfer the onions into my big strainer pot and let them drain for a little while longer. As you can see, they continued dripping out quite a lot of liquid even after removing them from the heat. And after letting everything come back down to about room temperature, I've transferred the onions into this half pan for the next couple of steps. First, I'll give them a little more seasoning in the form of one of my standard barbecue rubs. I did already salt these onions, so I don't need to go crazy here. Second, these onions are still pretty wet and sloppy, and I definitely think I need to tighten them up some before even thinking about stuffing them into sausage casings. So I'm going to mix in a bunch of store-bought breadcrumbs. Think of them like a binder, similar to how they're used in meatloaf or meatballs. Now I'll stick this whole pan into the fridge for an hour or so the mixture is quite cold and firm when I move on to the sausage making step, which, thanks to the power of movie magic, is right now. I'll load up my Lem 5-pound sausage stuffer machine with all of this onion mixture, and then start loading my casings onto the stuffer tube. For hot dog sized links, I'm using natural sheep casing. Now to tie off the end and start cranking. Right away, it's super clear that this is completely different than stuffing a meat mixture, and it just plain feels wrong on every level. It may not look too crazy in the video, but the feel of this is so bizarre and different from any sausage I've ever made. Nevertheless, I'll continue cranking away, filling up that casing with my onion mixture. Once I've stuffed all of it, I end up with this great big coil. And now I'll just start twisting them into links, like I would any sausage. These definitely feel squishier, sloppier, and softer than any meat sausage I've ever made. So I will take great care not to split any of the links as I handle and twist them. So I guess I can say that the filling of the sausage casings technically worked, but I will say that these sausages or these onion dogs or whatever you want to call them are quite wet. There's a lot of moisture still kind of coming through that casing. So I think it's going to be really important to leave them sitting on a tray in the refrigerator overnight in hopes that they kind of dry out a bit before I try going any further with this. So we're going to pick it up tomorrow and see what we're looking at. Okay, it's the next day, and these things have definitely dried out quite a bit. They've actually gotten pretty sticky, as I guess the sugars in the liquid seeping out of the casings has kind of dried and gotten tacky, but they're still kind of wet. They're still kind of mushy. So I think what I want to do is another side experiment wherein I try smoking some of these to see if that improves it. Smoking is going to really help dry them out a little bit more, maybe make the casing a little bit more durable. I've pretty much been worried about them splitting or just bursting open at any point during this whole thing. So I'm going to fire up the offset smoker and give a few of them just maybe a couple hours on pretty low heat, maybe around 175, 160 degrees, and see how those do compared to the non-smoked ones. All right, now I just need to let those smoke for a couple hours, and I've got some time to kill. So I'm gonna go ahead and make my batter. And while I'm at it, I also feel like this wouldn't be a proper onion ring-esque thing without a little bit of onion ring sauce to dip in it. First, we'll make the batter. I'll start with a 1.5 cups of all-purpose flour and add to that 1 teaspoon of baking soda, 2 teaspoons of salt, 2 teaspoons paprika, 1 teaspoon garlic powder, a 1/2 teaspoon of black pepper, and since this is a beer batter, 12 ounces of beer. If you don't want beer batter, you can use seltzer water instead. Give that all a very thorough whisk, and into the fridge it goes until I'm ready for it. Next up, a tangy dipping sauce that is perfect for battered onion of any format. Into a bowl goes 2/3 cup of mayo, followed by 1/3 cup of barbecue sauce, 1 teaspoon Dijon mustard, 1/2 teaspoon of honey, 1/2 teaspoon of paprika, and a 1/4 teaspoon of chipotle powder. Whisk together very well and refrigerate until it's time to use. And by the way, check out the video description below for the full ingredients and quantities for both the batter and my onion ring sauce. After my sampling of links have smoked for a couple hours, it's time to separate all of my links into individual sausages. Using a very sharp knife, I'll just cut each one of the smoked and non-smoked links apart at the twist. Now all that's left to do is start battering and frying. So I'll get lots of vegetable oil heated up to about 375 degrees. And while it's heating up, I'll get my battering assembly line together. First, I'll dust each link in some all-purpose flour. These links are still slightly damp, and this flour will take care of that and ensure the batter will stick. And then they're just going into that beer batter we made earlier. Once I've got a few battered up, I'm moving back outside to start deep frying. I'll gently drop in one of my battered dogs and let it fry completely before putting in another. I've learned my lesson from the last time I did this, and I definitely don't want another boil over. It doesn't take long before the batter is a deep golden brown and it's ready to come out. Only about a minute. I'll do the rest that I've already dipped in batter, and then we're moving back inside to finally give these things a taste. Well, I'm not exactly sure what to say about that. It's definitely weird, but it's kind of delicious in a really unusual way. It tastes mostly like a beer-battered onion ring, but you're definitely getting way more onion per bite than you would with an onion ring. That natural casing isn't especially snappy, which you would definitely want with a hot dog or a sausage. It's not chewy or stringy, but it's just not especially snappy, but I seem to be able to bite through it just fine. I think I need to take another bite and try some of the sauce. That's pretty good. I really like it with the sauce. This was a pretty weird experiment, but I think for the most part, I have to call it a success. I might not go out of my way to make this all the time, but definitely was interesting and I think worth doing. If you really like a big mouthful of onion inside of some crispy beer batter, you might just love it. And you know, I could actually see this working really well served kind of like a sausage on a bun. So I think I'm going to try doing just that. A toasted brioche hot dog bun with some of that sauce on there. I don't know. I don't think the hot dog bun is the way to go. I think you got way too much bread to other stuff ratio. The bun, all that batter and so forth. You really need something kind of meaty and fatty to really kind of make up for all that bread. So I don't know, that was a nice idea, but I don't think it's the way to go. I think just dipping it right in the sauce like you would an onion ring and eating it like that is the winning move. I'm curious about one more thing though, and that's what if I didn't batter and deep fry these things, but rather just tried grilling one of them like a hot dog. So I fired up the propane grill and rubbed a little bit of olive oil on a couple of these onion dogs. I'll do one of them that was smoked and one of them that wasn't smoked just to see if there's any difference. Pretty quickly I'm seeing that the unsmoked one doesn't really stand a chance. It's just a little bit too mushy and it's starting to fall apart already after only being on the grill a minute or two. The smoked one is holding up a lot better, but even still, after just about 4 minutes on there, it's starting to kind of come apart and leak onion pretty much wherever the grill grates were touching it. Firmed up a little bit on the grill, but it's still pretty loose. I don't think this is going to be an amazing bite. I think that batter really was the key element to making this a pretty tasty presentation. But I'll give it a bite anyhow. Nope, I'm cutting that short right in the video. That was just way too sort of mushy, and that casing was just basically falling apart. Not a really great bite. Now this is one of the battered and deep fried ones that was not smoked first, and I can tell that it feels still a bit looser and sloppy inside, like it might still be a bit too wet. So I'm glad I smoked a bunch of them to try that way. It really did help dry them out a bit. And if you did want to try this silly onion dog idea, that's probably what I would recommend. Smoking them, battering them, deep frying them. Is it worth the effort to get something that just tastes like a more oniony onion ring? I don't know. Maybe not. It was kind of fun to play around with, and I'm glad I tried it. And if you take nothing else from this video, at least you've got that delicious beer batter recipe and this onion ring sauce that I think is just outstanding. So I guess that's about it for now. Be sure to like and subscribe and stay up to date with all our latest stuff, including future weird sausage and food experimentation videos. Thanks for watching, and until next time, I'm John, and this is Great Lakes Country.